Speaking of front offices, John, the Las Vegas Raiders, who Devontae Adams' upfront guarantee looks better and better with every receiver contract that gets signed. Because A.J. Brown was, what, 40? Devontae's guaranteed at signing was how much?
Yeah, I think it was a little over 20. As I was told by someone who negotiated with the Raiders, just look at the amount of money they pay up front historically relative to other teams. It's not quite in the same ballpark. So, yeah, the Raider fans used to get mad at us about the way we financially talked about the team, but they don't exactly operate like, you see Stephen Ross, what he gave in the Polygolas, what they gave Tyreek Hill and what they gave Stephon Diggs, it's a lot more money than Devontae up front. Now, like we always say about quarterbacks, Devontae ain't going anywhere, right? I mean, they traded a first and a second round pick for him. I would say at minimum, even if things got weird, he's on the team 3 years. I guess there is an out after 2, but I guess things could get really weird after 2. Yeah, I wouldn't. It's the NFL. Josh, who knows? He's got 2, though. You agree? He's got 2?
Yeah. Yes, he's got 2. They just, Patriot way coming to Vegas, John.
Did we talk about on the podcast the 3 first-round picks that failed, or was that on the live stream?
I believe that was on the live stream. That was not on the podcast.
I mean, it's really an all-time. I saw one of the PFF guys go, it's like historically just this is impossible to get any worse, right? Because 3 is basically the max amount of first-round picks you could ever have. I don't think anyone in the history of the modern-day draft is at 4 first-round picks. And definitely of the new CBA in 2011 when they've incorporated that 5th-year option. Like it is, that round is just different than the other rounds, correct? 2nd through 7th is a 4-year contract. Now you have to pay more money in the 2nd than you do the 5th, but the contract structure in terms of years is all the same. George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Fred Warner, why they all got extended. I mean, Deebo hasn't yet, but after year 3 was because their contract ends. And part of drafting a guy in the first round is to get the 5th-year option and to have all 3 decline. Now, I get it. They were all new players. And I saw the list. I think Vic Tafer tweeted it out. I think it was 11 of 32 guys so far had their options declined. And maybe there were a couple. I guess the date was yesterday. So 11 of 32, which shows you, right? We often talk about 50-50, right, in the first round. But I bet if you looked at some of the guys that had their 5th-year options picked up, I would throw like a McGlinchey in this kind of category. Like, just guys like that aren't just like home run picks.
Right.
So there is like the 33% of just decline. Then there's probably the 25% of like, we got to do it. We drafted him. He's a starter for us. But are we going to give him a huge extension? We'll take it year by year. And then there's just the no-brainers who you're actually trying to extend. But to have pretty easy declines, I mean, you and I talked about yesterday that Cleveland and Abram, I mean, you don't even have a discussion. It's like, decline. Jacobs, probably you got a conversation at the table when you're doing your draft meetings and free agent. You had a discussion about it.
To be clear, I'm not convinced if it was still Gruden's team that Jonathan Abrams' 5th-year option would be declined. You are?
Yeah, and that would be a royal mistake.
Are you you think it would be declined?
No, I'm not convinced, but I think that would be like you're just picking it up because he's your guy, not because he's any good. Because you wouldn't, Jonathan Abrams, if he hits the open market, would never get $12 million or whatever his 5th-year option would be, right?
Maybe it wouldn't be. I don't know.
Well, no, I think it reflects that one thing under John Gruden is they had no clue what they were doing in terms of personnel acquisitions. I think we acknowledged that when they could just coach, when John was just running the offense and the team had its moments where they were not like a joke. Was it underwhelming giving us hype? For sure. But them running a draft and personnel stuff, like this had to be the most seamless offseason they've had since like the heyday of the Raiders and like Al Davis still had his shit together in like the late 90s probably, or maybe the 80s. It just feels like a pretty normal franchise. I mean, they were under Gruden pretty herky-jerky. And I'm not putting rugs on them at all. I put Arnett because, I mean, I had talked to someone before the draft and somehow that guy came up and they're like, how they took him that high? I mean, character guy. Like Leatherwood was more just, is he good enough? Arnett was like known as a red flag person, And I just, sometimes you got to get lucky. I mean, one thing Mark Davis mentioned when he hired, he's like, I didn't even know Josh McDaniel was available. Remember when he like interviewed Ziegler and Ziegler's like, oh, who's your coach? He's like, Josh. It's like, he's available. And so listen, the 49ers got lucky with Kyle. Josh turned him down. They ended up into Kyle. They got lucky with Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh was coaching 10 minutes up the road. If Jim Harbaugh had been doing what he did at Stanford, at Vanderbilt, or Boston College, he's probably not ever coaching the 49ers. So Jed gets lucky. Like, you got to get lucky. Someone asked me the other day, they're like, why is it so difficult to hire coaches? Honestly, I think it's a lot like players, because you are projecting a person. You could argue it's even harder because, like, I don't know how, unless he's been a coach before, right? Like a Ron Rivera or Andy Reid, but like a first-time coordinator, Nick Sirianni, hell, Kyle Shanahan, who's a lifer. You go, I think, but I don't know. How's he going to handle the defense? How's he going to be with the whole team? Can he handle his emotions? Guys get overwhelmed because we have a long history of guys that are good coordinators that are terrible head coaches. And guys, the difference, though, is with Gruden, let's not forget a lot of the things he used to say on ESPN. Draft Johnny Manziel! And part of it might have just been hype up the hype machine, because that's kind of was his deal on TV. But then part of it, like once you look at his drafting, maybe he was serious.
He didn't want to be wrong at the end of the day. You don't want to be, you don't want to be wrong. I think one thing that'll be interesting.
Now Belichick liked Johnny Manziel too, so it's not like he.
Yeah, they just. I don't think they were going to take him in the first round. Well, they decided before the draft they were going to take Jimmy over Johnny Manziel.
Didn't they bring them both together on a visit?
Did they bring them together? I don't remember that part of the book.
I
know it was between
if they didn't say that
two
in the book, I think Lombardi said that was a Belichick move, that two players, same position, you bring at the same time and you kind of let the cream rise.
Oh, interesting. I know people ask us sometimes when we say the book, because we've been talking about it for months. Better to be feared is the Seth Wickersham book that we both highly recommend.
Fantastic read. Listen.
This is so, like, just as an example, here's the Raiders draft, right? For people who haven't seen it up close, maybe. Dylan Parham, offensive lineman in the 3rd. Running back in the 4th. A couple of defensive tackles in the 4th and 5th. An offensive lineman and a running back in the 7th. Let's look at just some historic Patriots drafts, since that's what these guys were a part of. Last year, obviously, Mac Jones gets all the attention. But they got a 4th-round running back that turned out to be pretty damn good. Ramondre Stevenson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be interesting if Will Sherman ever makes their team. The year before, they got a tackle in the 6th and a guard in the 6th. That was 2020. Those two guys have combined for 60 game appearances for them. That's a lot.
Yeah, it is.
32 and 28. They've made multiple starts for them over the years. The year before that, 2019, all these guys have played. They got their punter in the 5th. They got 17 games out of their 7th-round corner. They got 19 games out of a 5th-round defensive tackle. They got 14 games out of a guard in the 4th. They got 60 games out of a 7th-round corner the year before that. Braxton Berrios, not their guy, but he's turned out to be a good pro. They got him in the 6th round.
Yeah.
So, the point is, like, 48 games out of an inside linebacker, Jawan Bentley, as I'm going through this thing. I'm going to keep going. Like, the odds are, if the Patriots history is any recent history, and I know you've made the point a few times about Bill's coaching tree is not great. Bill's front office tree is pretty solid. So maybe the Ziegler element of this 1-2 punch here with Ziegler and McDaniels is just as, if not more important than the McDaniels with an S part of this, right?
I think Josh said when he got the job, and maybe this is a learning experience, is he realized he needed a good right-hand man, and it's why he wanted this package deal, so a guy he could trust, because it's so much easier to be a good coach. It's like anything in life, right? The more responsibility you can delegate to people you trust, the more successful you can be in whatever your job is, and focus on, whatever the most important part about your actual role. And with Josh, it would be implementing the offense. He's the offensive coordinator. It would be implementing the scheme. It would be coaching his coaches. You don't have the time to just run a college scouting department, which definitely felt like a lot of the New England guys that have failed. They try to do everything. And Josh specifically, when he went to Denver, at 33 years old, he thought he could just be like Bill Walsh meets Bill Belichick meets Bill Parcells, and he made it a year and a half. And I do just wonder, like I said, like you can't really dispute. Now, I can't, I'm not some draft nerd anymore where I can just rattle off every Texans player, but everyone I've talked to is like, I think the Texans had a pretty good draft. And
Really?
think about the ammo they have coming with, for the next several years of first and second round picks, right? They're going to double dip now for a while. Even if the Browns are good, having the extra pick 24, even if your pick's 10, isn't a bad thing, right? We just saw the Lions go from 32 to 13 to get, or 12 to get Jameson Williams. So I think there's an element of, I just wonder if Bill just has different conversations with those guys, right? He's just in a different, even during the season, right? If
He needs them a little more.
Yeah, and you're just talking a little bit differently. Like when you're the O-line coach, you're just obsessed with, like, we're just talking about the scheme, we're just talking about the opponent. Where when I go into Ziegler's office, when John Robinson comes back into town as scouting director, we're just talking bigger philosophical stuff. Like, how do you think this guy compares to this? You're just talking a little bit differently than the week-to-week, scheme-to-scheme stuff, which clearly in New England, they just get on that. As Phil Savage once told me, Belichick gets on the treadmill of football, and he doesn't break pace till the draft, from the start of training camp till the draft. But I do think the coaches do something very specific where the personnel people, they're doing free agents, they're doing college guys. The one thing he gives, this is, I would say, Bill's greatest quality. As a college, you can't become a college scout without working in pro scouting for them. And typically he makes you become at least a coach assistant for a year. So you just see everything. And those guys that become personnel people, they have just seen it all in the building. So they just have a pretty good understanding of how everything's working. Where the coaches, he puts you like on offense and defense and moves you around until you find your spot, but it's just coaching. Where a personnel guy, you get to feel the pro, you get to feel the college. And I just think it's just a different conversation than, like, you're not playing a part in the game. So he's not going to be as mad at you on a weekly basis, right? Like in November, in the heat of the season, like, he's going to have a hot take would be the wrong word, but like a legitimate, like, is my wide receiver coach doing a good or bad job? Where if you're just hey, I was at home with Cougar Linda and I was watching the LSU Bama game and this little corner from LSU stood out. What's his deal? And I just think your conversations are probably different with Bill.
The coaches are never left alone.
I noticed it when I worked for Coach Hill, right? Because all we had were coaches. We didn't have a personnel staff. He just interacted a lot differently with me and Drew than he did the coaches during the season. Just because it was like almost a release. Like we get to talk recruiting, get to do, he just could kind of chill.
Interesting.